Thanks for being here. Let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Ralph Olick. I'm run the product on the ads side, from the programmatic piece as well as like the social products and our dynamic display products and so on and so forth. So, and I'm here with Barry, long-standing colleague, friend, partner. We go way back since 2015-16 on various projects previously. And yeah, Barry, maybe you may say a couple of words about yourself.
Thanks, Ralph. Great to be with you all, and I think I met a couple people at lunch, but hi, everybody. I'm Barry, so I quickly try and get through a brief background. I've been involved in internet advertising since '99. Did a kind of a music file sharing startup that flopped badly during the dot-com crash. Later got into programmatic. Met gentlemen like him at a company called Ipon Web, and if anyone's deeply into programmatic, you'd know Ipon Web. We built a lot of the old DSP and SSP stacks in the industry for many years, and so I was in that business for a while, ran a business in there called BidSwitch, which we'll probably touch on a little bit. Some of you may trade through BidSwitch, and we were recently acquired by Criteo, so my title is now a little bit complicated. I'm the Executive Managing Director of Ad Tech for Criteo, and the general manager of BidSwitch.
Thanks. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, topic for today is like why you might all be aware of what happens to the cookie, right? So, Google announced in February 2020 that they want to phase out the cookie, and well, it's still there. Hasn't happened yet. What will happen going forward? Will it happen at all? And I hope we get at least a little bit closer to the answer of this during this session. So, yeah, what happened since February 2020, Barry? What do you think? I mean, what's your take on it?
Yeah, so just for context, the cookie was crumbling before all of this with Google. So just if you're not aware already, the largest browser in the world is the Google Chrome browser. It accounts for about 65% of traffic globally, and it varies by market a little bit. So that was where all the third-party cookies were really still alive. If you look at Safari and Firefox and others, they were phasing out these cookies quite a while ago. So the remaining kind of bastion of cookies has been in the Chrome browser. Google announced in 2020 they were going to deprecate that. That was supposed to end in 2022. And then, of course, in 2022 they said, no, we're going to wait. We need a little bit more time. We're going to do it now in 2023. They kicked the can once again. And so now the latest is basically as follows. So they have a proposal that's going in front of the CMA, which is the governing body here in the UK. They are live testing with this body in Q3 of this year. If those tests go as expected, they will start to phase out and deprecate the cookie in January of next year, and the full phase out of the cookie will be throughout the rest of next year. So by January 2025, there will be no more third-party cookies in Chrome if the CMA plays ball. So that's roughly where we are today.
And well, it might still happen that they postpone it any further, right? So
at this stage, I think they're pot committed. So they've put a ton now, not just the embarrassment of having all these kind of failed announcements, but also they've just put a ton of resources through a Chrome team. So we'll talk a lot about the privacy sandbox that Google and the Chrome team have developed. For those who aren't aware, that's a hot topic to get into. And if just the background behind all of this is really consumer privacy. What's driving all this is privacy concerns, and it's been the case since 2011, if you remember, the e-privacy initiative that the European Commission released. That didn't go that well. The implementation was a bit
years,
sketchy, yeah, at least. So then you had GDPR. So this whole thing has been cooking for a long time. It's just been the U.S. that's been a bit of a holdout. Europe's been ahead on this for a long time. But I think Google's going to do it, and I think the ads team is a little bit more aligned, to your point, especially given recent earnings calls and pressure from the market. I mean, look, Google's got a lot to gain if they can have a decent environment that supports addressable advertising, not at the level of users, individual users, but close to that. Then they can probably gain share through Chrome.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to a point where, I mean, what do we actually do with the cookie today, and why is it so important for us? I think we have a lot of application for the cookie, which is like targeting, audience targeting, finding the right audiences, retargeting, right? Anything from first-time deposit, or from registration finish to first-time deposits, potentially like retention plays. All this is partially done on cookies still today. Third-party data, audience segments, audience data that we're getting, demographic targeting, all these kind of things. But also most important for us is performance tracking, right? Last click, post view, how does that all merge together? Is it still working when we don't have a cookie anymore? And these are the kind of questions that we are asking ourselves. And how can we like make the services, the offering better that we're having today? And also how do we navigate in this kind of minefield when there's no cookie anymore, right? So that's what we want to discuss, and what are the alternatives in this ecosystem today. And so you're saying end of Q3?
Yeah,
Maybe?
look, I mean, the strange part about this is it's like a frog boiling in water, right? With it's kind of happening around us, and the frog is happy until it's dead. And so this is real this time, I would say. Like, don't quote me, but this is going to happen. So all the ships are in the harbor, and it will happen. So my advice to everybody is, if you're not yet testing alternatives to the third-party cookie, you really should be. And so we have about 5 or 6, maybe 7. Different tactics that you can deploy. And I want to be kind of clear, and this isn't to be doomsaying, but even if you deploy all these tactics relatively successfully, you will not have 100% coverage of what you get today from cookies. It'll be nearly impossible. And partly the reason is that the whole industry is moving away, driven by privacy concerns, moving away from individual user level type of targeting and identification towards segments, cohorts, groups, etc. So we should probably get into some of the tactics that you can and should be testing, and it's going to vary by, which part of the industry you're in. Some of these will make more sense than others, and you have to make that judgment. But
do you have a favorite tactic?
Well, I mean, if you're the right kind of player and you can leverage first-party data and collect first-party data, then that's the gold standard, right? You want to have let's call it a first-party data strategy, which involves ability to collect information directly from consumers. And if you're not on the supply side, i.e. a publisher or media owner, you want to be working with publishers and media owners who can do that to some extent, because that's going to be what a lot of stuff gets modeled off of, right? Your own audience data. So that's emails, phone numbers, the personal information that you can get directly from consumers. That's obviously super, super valuable. But if you look at the way the publishing world works, and especially in programmatic, the penetration of that data against the whole universe of users is very small. So if you work with like a LiveRamp or others to help onboard that data, that's a great step. And there are many other companies that do this. But generally speaking, you're not going to get massive amounts of coverage doing that way. Somewhere in the low double digits is usually.
Yeah, we looked into the numbers. The penetration of those IDs, depending obviously by country, is like very low double digits, if that. So LiveRamp, I don't know, might get 5, 10, 15% coverage in the bit stream, and things like this, ID5, bigger in Europe potentially, but it's quite tricky, yeah.
Well, you also have, so there's the difference between what we call authenticated ID, right, which would be coming off the back of an email or a hashed email or something like that. That's where you actually have a link to a user. And then probabilistic IDs, like an ID5, and there's many others, which are modeled IDs, not directly one-to-one identification. So again, there at one point there was 120 vendors we counted with probabilistic IDs. So it got very frothy, and now you're starting to see some of the winners pull out, and some of the also-rans that are kind of falling away. So it's starting to consolidate. You're starting to see a bit more scale with those IDs, but again, it won't be complete coverage anytime soon. And there's because of the incentives in the industry, you have the trade desk and you have others that have an ID solution. Because of the incentives, it's unlikely that others will play ball because they're competitive, right? So Google has its Chrome browser solution, which, if you're not yourself testing with the privacy sandbox, and the new name for this protocol is the Protected Audience API. It used to be called Fledge. So you should be talking to partners who are testing with Google on this, because we at Criteo have seen really good results, especially for the retargeting use case, which is pretty relevant for your industry. So, and part of the reason is when you don't have cookie syncing and cookie matching to deal with, which there's always signal loss and issues there, it's actually possible to get really good results. Now you have to, and I'm caveat that because it's early days and lots could change with the API, but so far the tests we've had have looked really quite good.
Yeah, and I think, that's something also we are looking into with, for example, an initiative that we have launched, which is called Fan ID, where we try to understand better and help like publishers as well as operators potentially to leverage their first-party data, have a better understanding of how they can use their players. And we just want to be somewhere in the middle saying, well, we don't know which ID vendor might be relevant in the US versus Europe, for example, or in Africa or in Asia. So we want to have this like abstraction layer in between that we can say, okay, let's utilize whatever is there. And maybe you also as an advertiser, you don't want to have 120 vendors on your website and trying to reach out and create one ID after another. That slows down your page and like everything. So it feels a little bit like that it's when GDPR happens and consent management was there, like 5 days prior to the deadline, there was no CMP being present on any website.
Happy frogs.
Happy frogs. And then it just happened overnight, basically, and everyone panicked. I just remember how many nightly sessions we had back then. So you think that will happen then with the ID vendors potentially going forward as well, like looking into it now, but emerging it later on?
Yeah, so I'll share what our approach is. So we're going Switzerland, right? We're actually working with, at this point, 16 different ID vendors. So we carry those IDs in the bid stream, and if that's present through other partners that we work with, so you need it to actually be on the supply side through an SSP and on the demand side. If it's present there, then you can activate on that, and you can trade on those IDs. Because the third-party cookie is still around, the trading volumes against those IDs are very small, and mostly it's just around testing, right? But what we're doing is we're creating a giant match table. Think of it this way, right? And we're mapping those IDs together so you can cross ID as long as it's present in the bid stream, and you can have it on the supply and demand side. It's possible to widen your reach by creating this mapping table. So that's what we're working on now. And we're not alone. Like a lot of folks are taking a similar approach, kind of a Switzerland thing, because if you place your bets all with the trade desk, you're limited to something like 10% of the trading environment.
And I think, that's where BidSwitch comes into play, because you have such a huge footprint in the industry and you see so many bid requests coming through. How many are there?
We're over 1 trillion a day, I think, now. So it's crazy. Like, we see all the traffic, basically. So I think next to Google and the trade desk, we probably see the most traffic out there. So, it's
massive.
It's massive, yeah.
Raise of hands, who has experimented so far with any ID providers, live RAMs? Anyone? Yet? Thought into it, looked into it? No?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, maybe. I know some folks have. Okay. So not that many. So looking at like the timelines, please, let's have a discussion around these kind of situations and like solutions that we are out there and what you should be considering. It's not the go-to solution, but it's one of many options. Another one which we are looking into is contextual. Better understanding of like how to apply the context of websites, where to show users or reach the audiences, like getting an understanding instead of using demographic targeting on third-party data, using a service that helps us understand websites from the bid stream, but also parsing the websites. What's your understanding on this one?
You should be testing contextual for sure. And look, contextual can be relatively powerful depending on your product and service. Like if I think about betting, sports betting, you think about sports, maybe not fly fishing. I don't know if there's heavy gaming in that. But, certain sports where, if you're a big baseball enthusiast, for example, or whatever, that context is still available. So I would absolutely be looking at contextual as an alternative. Again, it won't completely cover your butt, but it will do a slice of the pie for sure.
Yeah. What you won't have is like measurement, right? So you can do the targeting, but measurement might be tricky with the contextual part, right? When conversions are happening.
Yeah, this might be the hardest thing for including our company. It's fundamentally we all have to kind of reconceptualize how you think about measurement and attribution. So it's just not going to be possible moving forward to have user level attribution in these kind of environments. And by the way, this is also true in the app ecosystem, right? With Apple, they've been for a long time now basically removing the ability for tracking at user level. And so there's ATT, and now but there are solutions to these things. So, but yeah, ultimately, pretty big impact from that.
Yeah. In preparation of this event, we looked up a couple of numbers of our platforms and what we are seeing, and depending on country and region and so on and so forth, we are anywhere between, on the attribution side, cookieless attribution between 40 and 60%. So, I mean, depending on the penetration of Chrome, obviously, we have more cookies. But even yet today, the campaigns that you're having and running are being attributed already with like non-cookie based conversions. And when we apply through various means contextual targeting, we can still track them using fingerprinting methodologies and so on and so forth, which probably brings us to the next topic on like what we could do. Fingerprinting solutions that we have there, using it like right now we are using a combination of like user agent, IP addresses and so on and so forth. Hearing what the browsers might be doing going forward, like cutting out the IP addresses, do you think that is a solution that would be sustainable?
Yeah, it's going to be like whack-a-mole for a while. So, you know, there's an arms race effectively going on with this. And what I can say is the second largest now advertising platform out there now considers IP address to be PII, and they will not use it whatsoever in anything. So, and they're huge. So if that's a signal, I wouldn't bet the farm on IP address, right? I'd say you hedge and you implement what you can there, but don't be a happy frog
on IP address. Yeah,
right.
I agree. But also, I mean, cookies won't go away completely, potentially, right? You can still opt in.
First-party cookies will...
Yes, first-party cookies are around, right? So you can try to find ways how you utilize the first-party cookies, how you do syncing methodologies and passing on data through a first-party cookie to a third-party, right?
Yeah, so it brings on another interesting topic, and this is getting quite a bit bigger in the industry suddenly. So there's data lakes and clean rooms. These are two models of being able to exchange first-party data that is sensitive data that you do not want leaked, but that you can map to a partner who has a similar type of data set and enrich your data effectively without having a full exchange of the data. So they don't actually get, that partner doesn't get the data you have, but they can enrich their own data. So we see this, and the cloud providers are now leaning heavily into this. So Google has a solution called Pair, Amazon Web Services has a solution. There's many other, Snowflake, and the list goes on. That's something worth exploring, especially where you have trusted partners. And I think it takes me to another topic, which is, in the absence of these identifiers, you need ways of having trust, because effectively you won't get the signals that you want. And so I think what we're seeing a lot more is, a good example would be private marketplaces, or PMP. PMPs are private deals that are packages of inventory that you buy from a trusted supply source, and effectively they're becoming like a proxy for trust. So a lot more growth in PMPs. In fact, if you look at across the entire universe of programmatic trading, more than half of the trading globally is now tied into private deals. And that's just going to continue.
Yeah, which wasn't the case a couple of years ago, right?
God,
Nothing. It was tiny fractions of private deals,
tiny.
Right? Yeah. And when we launched the ads platform for programmatic, there was one of the key aspects that we figured out, like supply curation, and like which comes with PMPs, but also everything when it comes down to compliance, like making sure that we're compliant with local regulations and stuff like this, that we make sure that the supply is there, be it open market, dealing with the SSPs directly, working with you guys on the BitSwitch side to making sure we have a framework in place that it's working, but also with our supply team is creating PMPs to trade on. And then you can even package data on top of this, where you can even if you don't have a reach right now for publishers or have your own strategy, we can package this up with the PMPs and then go from there potentially, right? So
yeah, you just touched on another tactic. I hadn't really thought of it in the notes, but it's called curation generally in the market. So the idea being you take what's in the bid stream that's coming through the pipes of the supply side, some exchanges, and you match against that supply your own signal. So you need a way to match it. You need something in there to match. But from that match, you can enrich that data with your own secret sauce, let's say, or if it's regulatory signals, or it's something to do with some other signal that says this is a valuable cohort. It's a great tactic, and there's a bunch of platforms out there that offer curation services. We're one of them. There are several others. So that's also a pretty interesting tactic. And in some cases, there might be folks in the room who should think about becoming curators themselves, not just buying curated packages, but providing them.
Yeah, mixing it all up and like making sure that you potentially add in your data. I know, I mean, it's a constant discussion that your audience is sacred and it's like your audience going there and you want to protect it as much as possible. But potentially with data clean rooms, with other packaging up on the supply side, there are tactics that you could utilize to enable your audience, but also share it back in the industry potentially.
Yeah, well, if you
that
think
might be beneficial.
Yeah, and I think a good area to look for folks in the room is if you look at what Criteo's been up to now, it's all about retail media. So it's turning traditional retailers into publishers effectively so that they have their own ads business now. And it's huge, explosive growth. And I think that's going to be a trend for a lot of folks. But for that to be successful, you kind of need these. You need to be sure your data is secure, that you have trusted partners that you're able to trade with. Otherwise, you're leaking your most valuable asset.
Which is your audience, basically.
Correct.
Or your players, right? We heard a lot about the cookies on mobile app installs. There's not so much about a cookie, right? Or there are,
right.
but in-app, they're gone instantaneously.
Correct.
iOS 14 updates, SCAD network. What do you see there in terms of like how did we grow and?
Yeah. I mean, two things. One, I think it's pretty clear what Apple's doing, right? They're just going to become more and more closed off, and there's going to be less and less sharing of data from their app environment, and likely they're going to launch their own walled garden. They're already kind of at it already. So, but you could use tools like Scan or SCADN network, right? And so it's a way of, so Apple uses this to basically anonymize users, but still deliver certain data that's important for attribution, like the app ID and the advertiser ID and things like that. So you can actually get good attribution in terms of understanding campaign performance and ROAS. The problem is you don't get that user level piece, right? So in that environment, what I recommend is there are probably 40 or 50 vendors that provide measurement services there. We were talking about this. How do you pick one? Talk to folks like us or other people who know programmatic very well. I would recommend sticking with kind of the big four. I'm not getting too experimental here. There are plenty of startups who may do very well, but when you're trying to test and learn, I would go with the sort of safe
household names, basically. Yeah.
So work with a measurement company that has a capability around Scan. Run test campaigns. We're doing this all the time now in app environments, and we do see pretty good results in general. Again, not that granular user level, but the high-level metrics that you're looking for are there.
I think one of the challenge, or I mean, it might not apply to all our to the overall audience here because some of the operators just don't run mobile apps, right? So they are not there for you for various reasons. Google was very hesitant. Apple was hesitant to allow this in their app stores. They changed, but for the clients that are running mobile app install campaigns, I mean, using one of these vendors, top-tier vendors, helps a lot. Still, there's a lot to be figured out. How do we track in-app events? If we do different apps between sportsbook and casino potentially, how do we mix it up and how do we see traction there? So we have very interesting discussions with our customers there as well. So there's still a lot to be figured out, especially on iOS, but also on Android.
100%. Yeah, I agreed.
And then, do you have any solution in mind when it comes to cross-app-to-web environment? I mean, is there anything good, like tracking performance from in-app to web or web to in-app?
If I'm honest, I haven't heard of anything that's mind-blowing apart from there are companies that have multiple apps themselves and that they have an interest in cross-marketing, et cetera, within those app ecosystems. So I would suggest looking at the sort of ecosystem players where there's multiple apps and you can start to stitch that stuff together. Mm-hmm. But where they're completely separate, it's a pretty big challenge in iOS.
Yeah,
for sure.
I would fully agree there. It's quite tricky. So we have spoken about cookies.
Yep.
Contextual. Sandbox a little bit.
Oh, yeah. So I did touch on this. So this is the Protected Audience API. The trouble is right now that Google's in, I think it's beta still. So there's only a handful of partners. We're one of them. We're a very close partner on this. As I said, it's not just retargeting use cases. It's third-party cookie replacement. Their first run at this was pretty disastrous, which is another reason you have these extended timelines, right? Google doesn't want to launch something that's not going to work. So the first round that they had, was it called Topics? Anyway, It just wasn't performative, and a lot of folks kind of kicked back on it. And so now this new API is more granular. It's less broad cohorts and much more granular, but still not to the user level. So again, if you yourself aren't able to join the beta with Google, and that there's not too many that can, you should be talking to partners who are getting some learnings there, so that you can then kind of remora fish behind that, or what's the word?
Yeah. When we're looking, what Google is doing there, and how we are trying to get to these cohorts, and how it changed over time, basically. Do you think this is something that advertisers need to change their mind on, how they measure attribution, how they track performance of a campaign, and with all the other things that we have discussed as well? How do we get, or what I think is that right now we're trying to measure one-to-one conversions, right? We tried, a lot of folks we're talking to still measure post-click attribution. Yep. We see a lot of big players that consider post-view, post-click both. On the affiliate side, going forward as well, there's a lot of post-click tracking, which is also still very much cookie-based, right? So when that's going away, how do we measure success, and what do you think are good ways of doing marketing campaigns going forward and tracking them and measuring them? Any suggestions on KPIs?
That is a difficult question, but it's something we all have to kind of wrestle with, because, as I said, I guess one way to think about it is we've been a bit spoiled, right, especially in the programmatic sort of display and video environments, because you can do this one-to-one tracking conversions, etc. Most other channels aren't like that, right? Like TV's never had that. So what's going to happen is everything's going to look a lot more like TV, effectively. So what I think people should be thinking about is, how do you think about measurement and attribution, knowing that you won't have that user-level granularity, and you should be having those discussions with your heads of marketing and other folks. And at the end of the day, we're all going to be in the same boat. So it's not like someone gets cookies and someone doesn't.
Somebody doesn't, yeah.
So it'll be a relative environment where, if you're a little ahead of the game, you can turn this into competitive advantage. And that's what a lot of folks are trying to do now, is say, I don't want to be the frog in the water. I'm going to use a capability here to actually differentiate from my competitors, because I can do it better than they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would also, what I would be suggesting there is looking at the overall media mix and spend, and just trying to understanding high-level spendings and KPIs, and you measure what you put in on top and what you get out at the bottom, and not to focus too much on one single channel, but seeing how you can split up the media mix and see if there's something working, instead of going, okay, I just track one particular channel, which might or might not have cookies, which might have scan or not scan. So it's quite tricky. So I think you need to go more to a transparent level, understanding where your audience is, where your campaigns are getting basically delivered, and then figure out the underlying KPIs.
Yeah, I think I would agree with what you said there. It's going to be different for everybody, just because you have your own areas, the main channels that you focus on, etc. But I would agree with what you're saying. I also think, just if things look more like TV, take a look at what's going on the TV measurement side of your business. Talk to those folks more. We're going to end up meeting more in the middle on how all this starts to look over time. But having great first-party data assets can get you out can give you a real advantage. So. I still talk to publishers who are like, "Oh, do you think we should be collecting registration data?" I'm like, "Yeah. I kind of do."
And everyone here in the room has basically a treasure chest of first-party data, right? You have your email addresses, phone numbers. You know where the people are living. You have even more. You have age, gender, all of this. So there's a lot of value that you could use going forward for your marketing campaigns if you deploy them correctly. If you work with partners. To activate that data, like we are doing for some of our clients already, with through PMPs, through data uploads, through clean rooms potentially. So these are the things that we could be doing there. What's your take? Cookies are now for free, right? They come for free. They're in the browser. They just don't cost anything, right? All of the mentioned solutions basically come at cost. Do you think it's worth deploying all of them? or should you pick and choose? Or
well, I mean, the first thing to say is cookies are free and not free, right? Because it costs a fortune to do. Like we spend 7 figures a month just on BidSwitch on cloud just to do cookie matching and syncing, right? So the unit itself may be free, but processing cookies is actually quite costly. So what we're looking at is, in this new world, you almost have a replacement cost to think about. So if you look at the data centers and all the rest of it that you're spending on doing all this stuff with cookies, I just take that budget and say, okay, well that's going to go over here now, and then I'm going to deploy the tactics that make the most sense for my business. So can I double down on first party? Can I get involved with close partnerships where I leverage clean room technologies? Can I afford to do testing of multiple partners on the third party ID front? And it'll come down to where you sit in the market, but there is a cost, and so the way I think about it at least is let's transfer that cost into these new
transition
solutions.
Basically one cost into another.
Yeah, effectively. I mean, that, you got to sit down with finance and figure it out. But that's one of the arguments I would have, which is we are spending quite a lot on this, and and also look when it comes to the Chrome solution, we still don't know. It looks like this will be a lighter treatment, and that the other side benefit of all of this is all this cookie matching and syncing is actually a huge amount of carbon that's going into the environment as well. So the Earth will heave a sigh of relief when the cookie's gone, I think.
Yeah.
Even if we don't.
Finally, we're doing something good with advertising.
Right.
Good. Yeah, well, I mean, from my side, key takeaways would be there are multiple solutions coming from, as you mentioned, contextual, PIDs, Google sandbox approach. These are the things that everyone should be looking at, talking to your vendors, not only us, but you working with many of them. So that's something you should be challenging on. Them have a clear understanding of how you are going to tackle the crumble of the cookie when it's going away. How do you deal with attribution going forward? How do you run marketing campaigns? What are the KPIs that you're looking at? Anything you would like to add to this, or?
I think we wanted this to be practical and useful to folks. So I think those are all quite important things to think about. But at the end of the day, I would not be the frog in the pot of water anymore. Like it was reasonable to take time because Google was kicking the can, and it felt like this could go on forever. And there was a lot of debate. Will they just keep the cookie after all? I really, really don't believe that it's going to be around, and so. My prediction, and it's a pretty strong prediction, is that by 2025 it's gone, and so that gives you, how long does it take any big company to get a plan together? In our case, it's like a couple of quarters of debating and another quarter to see what we can implement, and there goes that year. So I'd get on it now. I would create some urgency in my organization, and I would start to think about the optimal ways to deploy the tactics we've been talking about.
We have been talking about, yeah. Thanks. Questions from the audience we would like to receive. Anyone? Raise of hands. Don't be shy.
Be gentle.
Hi, Angelo from Kindred. Is incrementality testing a holy grail in this case then, once the cookies are gone, and given that apps versus web is something that we, even now, are not able to stitch together, would incrementality testing be that holy grail when it comes to attribution?
So when we're talking incrementality in the same channel or cross-channel, so I mean cross-channel, so incrementality from TV to something else potentially, or from in-app to mobile web, from social to, yeah, so in the total media mix. So your target is basically to reach the widest audience, like as many people as possible in your target group, and making sure that you do this most cost-effectively, right? Yeah. Ideally, right? Well, I mean, you want to make money out of it with the least cost possible, right?
Yeah, but how do you track that?
Yeah. So, very good one. How do you track this? When you're going from CTV deployment, which is your branding campaign potentially, you have to have an understanding of like what is the audience that you're reaching, what's the target group, what's the area that you're showing your CTV ads, for example, right, or your TV ads or your digital out-of-home ads. So you have a baseline with the traditional advertising space potentially, right? Having a full tracking solution, I don't know, MMM solution or whatever, there's nothing available that I'm aware of that could do it across all the panels or all technologies. Even the locked or the platforms that we heard about earlier, they can't do it. So I think the best approach there is taking a step back, understanding your audience planning, ideally, making sure that you get the incrementality, maybe run some brand uplift studies or using someone else to do this. So back in the days when I was working for YouTube, we had these kind of challenges to get TV budgets from our customers. And what we did is brand uplift studies showing that like the incremental uplift from TV to YouTube was much more cost effective because there's a lot of audience that you simply do not reach on TV. And that's the same approach I would be taking across all the channels there. Listen and try to understand what is the main audience for each channel. There is a different audience on Snap, on Facebook, on programmatic, on CTV. They are just different. And then just try to model from there and track as good as possible with different partners. Does that kind of... Yeah.
I hate to say, but I don't know if you can do much better. And again, though, there's almost an opportunity here with all these challenges, which is if you can do that more convincingly than your competitors, right? You're not going to have the perfect kinds of measurement here again, but if you can do a better job, it's a relative game, and so it's about how you package that up in a convincing way to the marketer, and in some sense, the best story wins.
Yeah. And everyone here in the room has kind of the same challenge.
Hi, Timmy from PlayOjo. To turn things, I guess, back to the app side a bit, you were talking about SCAD network, more specifically looking at Scan 4.0, which has obviously been around for a little bit of a while now, but is still relatively early in its adoption stages. Have you seen anything in any of your testing that has kind of been, I guess, impactful in terms of the insights that you've been getting from 4.0 compared to previous versions of Scan, given that it was, kind of proposed to be that big jump that would help marketers, or is it still kind of a lot of the same issues that we're seeing with previous versions?
What are we on, 4.2 now? I think it is. So part of the problem with Scan is that the relevant parties have to adopt the new format, and if they don't, it doesn't really work. So we run into a few situations where someone's on 4.0, this is 4.2, it doesn't really work. Yeah. So if you can sync up with the partners that are using it properly, it is meant to be slightly better on some measurement, but at the end of the day, it's the main things that you're getting are on kind of return on investment level stuff, not, again, that user level piece. So it can give you broad-based attribution, but not granular. I think we have a live campaign right now on 4.2, and I don't think the data is in yet on how it's working, but we did run into these hiccups where people were on different versions, etc. So there are a bunch of vendors out there, and if you approach us after, we can share some names that actually specialize in scan measurement. They are, they're fully up to date on all this, and they can kind of hold your hand along the way.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, as an addition to this, it's still early days. We're seeing numbers coming in. It's a lot of like the different versions is one thing, but also the adoption of the means that you can deploy and making sure that your teams are understanding exactly how to use this is still a learning curve. And then also with the distribution of like how many campaigns we are actually running on app install, scan network, and so on and so forth. So it's very early days, even though it's out there for quite some time already, but the adoption takes quite some while. Yeah.
Hi. So my question is, we've talked a lot about how programmatic can be really great from an acquisition standpoint, but given some of the market challenges and kind of what you guys have outlined as far as looking ahead, what can programmatic do from a retention standpoint? Because I feel like it might also be important to address how some of our vendors here or people just within this community can hold on to the data that they've already collected, and if there's any opportunity for that.
Do you want to do the general and I try to do the market?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a pretty common tactic now is that you would try to onboard CRM data, but that, of course, involves now going into a cookie environment. But you can try and work with folks like a LiveRamp or others to onboard that data. And if it's an extension of CRM, for example, you can still play in the programmatic channels and leverage that data. So I think the underlying piece there is the first-party data assets that you want to focus on, and then finding partners that can help you onboard into non-cookie environment and make it part of your CRM.
Yeah, I think, I mean, for us, we are in the acquisition game mostly, right? But retention, CRM activation through programmatic is most often overlooked. So yes, you can reactivate through push notifications, emails, whatever. But I mean, emails get filtered, push notifications get disabled, and so on and so forth. So there are other means, like programmatic, for example, where you can be always top of mind with your brand, retargeting players that have placed a bet, that haven't placed a bet recently, or so on and so forth, that had a, I don't know, first party, are high valuable players or low valuable players, whatever you want to do. That's one thing. Still, yes, relying on the cookie. For the next couple of months, you can still try out campaigns there, how retention could work. And then if you see there's work, just partner up with one of the providers potentially.
Yeah, and I forgot, a bit of a duh moment for me. There's another easy way to start testing in the cookieless environment, and it's called every other browser except for Chrome, right? So an easy way to do testing is go into Safari environments and run your testing there.
Yeah. Which we are doing a lot already. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.